Welcome to the Brave Feminine Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Hamilton, and I get to interview global leaders and have delicious conversations and soak up their wisdom and perspective on life and leadership. Today, I'm joined by Mark Jones. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a real pleasure.
Pleasure to have you here. Let me share your bio briefly for people that haven't come across you before. So Mark Jones is Australia's master storyteller for business leaders, a highly acclaimed speaker, facilitator and business leader. He helps people tell their story to make an impact. Mark's a former IT editor at the Financial Review, was a journalist in Silicon Valley, and until recently was the CEO at Impact Institute, a professional services and events company that he co-founded 15 years ago with his wife of 28 years. And they've got 3 kids. That sounds like a really interesting... Four!
And 2 dogs.
Wow.
It's a
Mark
zoo.
stepped down from that role to pursue his passion for speaking and writing in June this year. And his first book, Bravefeminineleadership, Realise the True Value of Your Brand Story, was published at the beginning of the pandemic. And Mark, as you shared with me, it turns out that's bad timing for a book launch.
Yeah, don't do that.
Well, I hope there's no pandemic again, so no one has to worry about doing that. But let's get into your story, Mark. I would love to just ask you, can you just share, who are you as a human being?
Oh, wow. The answer is 42. Who am I?
Well, that's it. We're done. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Yeah, no, it's been great. Thanks for having me. So who am I? Well, I am... I think, like most of us, I wear a lot of hats. So I guess to start with family, husband of 28 years, you mentioned that. Married my best friend, best thing I ever did. Been married now and with 4 children, as I said, from 10 to 21 years. I nearly elevated my daughter's age there. 3 boys and a girl. And I think if I was to put it down to one thing, because I've done a bit of work on myself. I'm an encourager at heart. So when it comes to understanding who I am, I do own this idea of optimism, because optimism says, yeah, things are hard, but we can do it anyway. There's always a way. And I've always been quite optimistic. And I think part of my story has been sort of seeing challenges and either running at them or falling over them, and knowing that I can find a way, even though there's this kind of narrative in my head that is like, I'm not sure if I can actually do that. And probably a quick illustration that you mentioned the book, thanks. Back in the day, I remember Sydney summer, I was 18, it was, baking hot, and I was walking across, those sort of bitumen playground things that I don't know why they do that to kids, but they did. And it was hot. And I remember walking across out of my English room thinking it's journalism or bust. You're facing that sort of existential question about who am I and what am I going to do? And I was so excited, but terrified at the same time, because I thought, I don't know if I can actually do this. Turns out I did. And it wasn't sort of the easiest path, but I did. And I think that's been a big part of my story. And so whenever I get a chance to encourage other people on their journey and to, how do you face challenges, it's just, it's a buzz, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. Mark, my interest, as the minute I read your story, my interest, and I shared this with you briefly before we pressed record, was what sits behind this transition. You've created this wonderful business, and then now you're pursuing a completely different passion. And I know that somewhere behind there's a brave story to share. So tell us about that.
So I haven't told this story to anyone yet. So let me tell you I'll give you the professional answer, and then I'll give you the other answer that I think maybe answers the brave bit. I have, for the longest time, had the opportunity to speak and encourage people from the stage or in workshops or in events. I love hosting, in panels and bringing ideas alive. So this has been a long time passion. And I was preparing to make the transition from the company that my wife and I founded to do more and more speaking in 2019. In fact, they did a global speaking tour, and I was getting ready for it. And then the pandemic sort of wiped that idea for a while. And so here we are, we've sort of popped up out the other side. And from a business point of view, I realized that the company is in such a great position that it is growing with a really strong leadership and has a life of its own. And you probably have had conversations with other guests where you talk about it not being founder dependent or
Yeah.
key person
Yeah.
dependent.
Yeah.
And so I've worked with the team for a long time for that not to be the case, even though I led it through a 4-year merger transition, and that was a career highlight as well. And so, when you wake up one day and realize, hang on, the business doesn't actually need me anymore in a good way.
Yeah.
That's what we were working towards.
And suddenly it's here.
Yeah, and it was in probably in sort of May actually, and I realized, you know what, the financial year's about to close out. I probably should just like draw a neat little bow on the end of the financial year and then transition out of the CEO role. Also made a lot easier, I might add, because the general manager, whom I've worked with now for 10 years, and she's actually been a friend of my wife and I for much, much longer than that, like 25, 30 years. Her name's Paula Cowan. She has been general manager, and the way that we run the business is that as the CEO or the visionary, reporting to that person is the general manager, and from there, everybody else reports to her.
Mm-hmm.
She's been running the business for a while anyway. And so I had a conversation with her about her taking over as managing director was the title that she was comfortable with. And honestly, I couldn't be more thrilled.
Yeah.
She was like, yeah, of course, let's go. So I'm still on the board. I'm still one of the owners of the business, but I don't need to be involved. So the fact that I could do that without wrecking it,
Yes.
to use a technical term, was a big kind of moment for me to realize this could actually work. So that's the profession.
That's an amazing achievement in itself, just quickly. I know that's the professional answer, but a lot of businesses don't get to that point. So I hope you sit back and kind of, realize that. But anyway, those things aside,
thank you. And I would give a big plug for two things. One, I actually got on this journey. If you haven't read the book E-Myth by Michael Gerber, really talks a lot about how to systematize your business. So I got onto that a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've built our business around this model called the Entrepreneur's Operating System, or EOS. And it's basically an operating system for your whole business. And
Right.
we've been very intentional about that. So yeah, it doesn't happen quickly, and it's not easy,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really satisfying to achieve a level of success, knowing that as a visionary, I'm, plenty more to go.
So can we move past the professional response?
Yeah. Okay. So quick story, like a quick story.
Yeah.
2019, I was at Bunnings and walking around the aisles, and I had this sensation come over me like, if I don't get home, if I don't get out of here now, I'm going to fall apart. Like it was that sort of rising heat, which I later discovered was a panic attack.
Yeah.
I got home just because I felt like I was going to faint was the feeling I had. And I was a complete mess. I had 2 weeks off work from a panic attack, which really was an unfamiliar thing to me. I learned later, when your body gets a bit starved of CO2, you can have like an out-of-body experience, like you're watching yourself. I can laugh about it now because I'm well, but it was shocking. And I call this you've seen Star Wars? Maybe not. People probably haven't seen Star Wars.
Yes, but I'm not.
Yoda, right? So
I know Yoda.
Fear leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering, right? It's that sort of, well, so in our professional lives, I had lots of stress, and stress causes anxiety. And if you don't deal with the anxiety, it manifests ultimately into depression and different forms of suffering for different people. Mine is not a unique story in that regard. But as the CEO of a business for such a long time, and having led it through some highs and lows, and then actually some really difficult times in the years preceding this, it kind of builds up like a toxicity. And I don't know if you've had this feeling, but when you're the owner and founder, you feel like you're married to the business and you can't leave, like you're trapped. And so that was the thing that I went to. And so to cut that long story short, lots of counseling, lots of support from my wife and family, an incredible up and down journey. I've seen all the right psychologists and psychiatrists, and changed my diet, fixed my sleep, like ticked all of the boxes. And I'm somebody who sort of leans into a problem. And in fact, I think as a piece of encouragement for anybody, for your listener who might be sort of familiar with this scenario, I remember my doctor saying to me, most blokes, middle-aged blokes like me, come to me after they've hit the tree. You've come to me before you've hit the tree. So good on you. So I had like that little sense of optimism. Okay, my body is not dealing with the amount of stress that I'm under right now, and I'm really not coping well, but at least I've kind of got onto it a bit early. So really that was the beginning of an incredible rewriting of my narrative, because I'm an optimist who's always like, I've had never had any health issues to speak of. I've always been bright and bubbly, and then to be kind of stopped in your tracks was quite frankly shocking.
Wow. So you've never shared that story before?
No.
Yeah. Well, thank you for trusting this space to share that story. I have not experienced what you're talking about, but I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I've had that sort of hit the wall moment where you've got to sit back and think about, what was before and what was after. The thing that intrigues me about what you said then, and I'm so glad that you, that your body gave you that warning sign of that panic attack that you could then do something about. I'm wondering about the doctor saying you got there before you hit the wall. I'm just wondering what hitting the wall looks like. If you
look, I don't think it's pretty, and I can't speak for women in terms of their experience, but I have looked a lot from the men, because as you know, male suicide is one of the leading causes of death for men. From their 30s through to 50s, and I think a lot of men don't have the ability to reach out for help, and they don't know what to do. And if you don't have people around you that you can trust, it's actually a very dangerous place to be in for your actual life and your ability to then cope. So I was quite fortunate in that the supports around me were good, and without wanting to be too immodest, I've got a pretty good high emotional intelligence as well. So I was aware that this is not something that you run away from. So for a lot of men, it becomes like something you've got to hold on to and keep and not give away, as it were, or to express and share and to be vulnerable. It's actually not a conditioning in society that we've been used to. Now, in my case, I've had my mother is still alive, and I remember being a teenager and staying up till all hours chatting to my mum about anything and everything, right? And so that sort of experience, I think, really laid the foundation for the person I am today, right? And so hitting the wall is a couple of things. One, it can be, at the extreme end of self-harm. It can be medicating with drugs and alcohol. Or other forms of addiction. And it can also be like some blokes, and I think people of all genders and ages, can really plow themselves into their work or into their sport, and then ultimately become unwound because you're sort of fighting the inevitable, which is you've got to face this thing, or your body's just going to say, I've had enough now.
Can I ask, a subject that I think is spoken about a lot, certainly spoken about a lot with female leaders and has a lot of airtime, I think, right now, is burnout. I mean, is this burnout, or is this a different thing altogether?
Yeah. This was a combination of burnout, stress, and ultimately depression. So one of the interesting things about this is I feel like this conversation is still not very well understood because of all of those interconnecting factors. And so I'm always careful to say it's just burnout or it's just depression, or I don't mean just, but it's
I know what you mean.
We can point our finger at one of those, right? And so look, burnout's an interesting one because again, again, like everything on a spectrum, you've got extreme versions, and then one of them's just like, well, when was the last time you had a holiday, right? Have you actually disconnected when you were away? Did you literally put your phone down and not look at emails? Like, did you stop and smell the roses, you know, metaphorically, right? Did you actually properly disconnect through to people you see have career breaks, and or they actually take a year out, you know, on maternity leave, those sorts of like life moments. And I think I've thought a bit about this because I think in society we've kind of lost a sense of transitioning well and breaking well and giving ourselves reset moments. I think it's no surprise that lots of families, even still after COVID, all this time, are trucking around Australia in caravans and RVs, right? And that constant thing around, I need a sense of well-being at work and I need life balance. We still haven't gone back to 5 days a week at the office, we all know, right? I mean, it's just not going to happen. We've started to taste what it's like to get a little bit more balance. But even in then, we're still trying to figure out how do we normalize that gap in your, you know, LinkedIn profile. And I actually, just from a bravery point of view to this conversation, I love it when people are really upfront and honest about their story. For example, I mentioned my GM and now MD Paula. When she first joined us, in her LinkedIn, she had Mother of the Year for a year. I saw that. I was just like, excellent. And that sort of fun, boldness, being open about it. I think we need to. There's a bit of bravery.
You can't hide. Yeah, I mean, you can't hide several year gaps. So
right. And then, but just engage and talk about what you're doing and where you're at. And I think the world has changed. Like, we can have these conversations now. So look, in my experience, just getting back to that idea of hitting the wall.
Yeah.
The hard thing is, are you going to follow advice? Are you going to do the things that you've got to do to survive, quite frankly? And this is where I see a lot of guys really struggle, because there's a degree of discipline involved, and a commitment of just showing up, and not letting go, right? So I'm going to do this. I'm going to, make appointments, or if I'm lucky enough to have someone make them for me, turn up, and be open and tell real stories about how I'm doing. So look, we're now sort of 5 years on, and I'm doing well, and I've sort of recovered the narrative, if you like.
Yeah.
The Mark of old, the optimist, the visionary guy, the encourager, and probably, I think, now with a lot more experience and compassion for what it's like to feel, almost as low as you can go.
Yeah. So how did you work out, and this is that sort of transition, thank you so much for sharing that so openly with us. How do you go, I mean, you're lucky because you've got the backdrop, lucky is the wrong word to use. You worked hard to build your business to a point where you had the backdrop that you could step away, and you could, you had choices that you could make as to where you went next. But what did that process look like for you of, having that serious event, having to find yourself and rebuild and all those sorts of things? And how during that process did you work out, well, hang on, this is actually what I want to do now?
Yeah, right. So I'm probably going to forget people and details and bits and pieces because,
we're not here for 24 hours.
It's not. I haven't got. Also, I'm sure my memory's not going to fail me. But a couple of things. One, at work, an incredibly strong senior team that was able to just say, "Go and look after yourself."
Yeah.
So that's number one. Availability of healthcare and related services is probably number two. And then the family piece, right? So they're probably the three building blocks that allowed me to get through those stages. And then I mean, I don't talk a lot about my faith and spirituality, but back in the day, I actually trained to become a Christian minister.
Did you
Turns out I accidentally built a business in the process of
doing
thinking I
that?
was going to become a Christian pastor. But my faith has also been a very key part of my journey,
Mm.
and so different people have different belief systems. And I think that's another part of aspect of life when we talk about, mind, body, and soul or spirit, or however anyone likes to think about it. I think if you can be really intentional, is probably the key word, about where are the gaps in your life, and how are you filling them with the right things.
Mm.
And so for me, it was about leaning into or falling over, as I said, because you stumble, those kind of main things. I also, by the way, along the way, discovered I had terrible sleep apnea. So just a hot tip, if you don't sleep well, like nothing else happens. Like it's the end. So I had to go
Mm.
to a sleep doctor. So, unfortunately, this journey ends up looking like a really long list,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And I think that's kind of why I'm hunting around here, because it's like, well, I've got documents and lists, and and I think if it's the willingness, and honestly, it is bravery and courage, because none of this is easy. Talk about being an adult is the willingness to do hard things,
Mm.
because no one else is going to make you do it. But I think it's actually the willingness to do hard things repeatedly.
Mm.
You actually, like, you have to keep turning up. That's the hard bit, right? Going to a doctor once is easy,
Mm.
because you've been cajoled into it, or you've just said fine. But actually turning up again and again and again until you're better, that's the long game. And so I'm really passionate about that. And for me, that's about the internal narrative. It's the stories you tell yourself. And are you looking to reclaim a story? Are you looking to write a new one? And this is kind of where my passion has started to emerge, because I think it's probably one of the greatest untold stories that we're facing collectively around, there's things I want to do, or visions, or even just problems right now that I've got to overcome. And it's no secret there's self-help books, till kingdom come, right?
Everyone's looking for the answer for that. You
Right?
raised then the stories we tell ourselves, right? And I know that's the subject of your next book.
Mm,
How are you? There's this big jump, and you're showing up differently. You've made a decision to do different things. You're
yeah,
sharing stories that probably historically you would have never gone anywhere near sharing those sorts of things.
yeah,
It's like, what's the drive? What got you to that point? I guess that's what I'm trying. You know what I mean? It's not. I know there's been a long process here for you in transition.
yeah.
What's your hope with all of the learnings and this crap experience that you've been through? But there's been no doubt an enormous amount of growth that's happened as a result of that. What are you wanting to do? What's the passion behind these books and things now? As the master storyteller, what's the why?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, again, I said before, like, my why is to encourage people. And
Yeah.
when you go through this process, you figure out what is the thing that you most want to do. And probably something I rebelled against a long time ago. I remember back at college, one of my lecturers said, you're a teacher, right? And I was like, what? I'm not a teacher. I'm a journalist,
Yeah.
that sort of.
Yeah.
But I think in my makeup, I love discovering things and
Mm.
then sharing them so that somebody else might benefit. It's kind of basically how I'm wired. If you think about the journalist experience for more than a decade of the beginning of my career, you go out, you find stories, and you come back and present your shiny new idea, and you hope that people will read and remember your byline. They don't, just by the way.
Mm.
Uh, but it's the sort of finding and telling piece. And so that's been a sort of a theme. I was also brought up in a household of very other-minded. And I think you asked me some questions before. Simon Sinek's got a book, Leaders Eat Last. I'm very much lead by doing and showing and serving.
Mm.
And I don't, I'm sort of wary about using too much jargon, but it's that idea that it's far better to give and to encourage than it is to sort of do things for yourself. And, you know, that's where the satisfaction for me comes. The
Mm.
idea that you can speak and encourage somebody and it actually makes a difference, is like, I could do that all day. And sometimes I do.
So stories we tell ourselves
Yeah.
to is it to help people understand we're all telling ourselves stories? Is it to help people know not to let those stories get in their way of doing things?
Yeah, I think it's to succeed in work and life
Mm.
is the point. And what we find, some of the research talks about a very popular idea of imposter syndrome, of course. And 70% of all professionals, at least once in their career, will suffer from that overwhelming of anxiety of like, I think I've bitten off too much that I can chew. I can't do this job, or I can't take that promotion, right? Blokes don't talk about it because they just pretend.
Yeah.
Women historically have been much better about discussing it. Bless them. Men have got a lot to learn, right? And I think um, being able to identify the thing, often it's you that are holding yourself back.
Yeah.
And I've sort of seen this time and time again as a journalist, in business, working with clients. We can actually put our own handbrake on, and it's easy to point the finger and blame others or the system. And I'm not saying that those factors are not there. Of course they are. But what I'm going after is the sort of hidden narrative that I've wrestled with around, well, can I do this? Am I good enough? Do I have what it takes? You know, and so forth. And a lot of that actually comes down to when you start rewriting or looking at the stories you're telling themselves. It's quite importantly, it's very disarming in a good way, right?
Mm.
When you actually write it down and you can see, I've actually been telling myself this lie
Yeah.
for a really long time. If I was to change that, what would that look like? You know, we talk about begin with the end in mind in business.
Yeah.
So what's the end that you've got in mind? What's the story going to look like if you think of yourself as an author?
Mm.
And you know, we're talking about CMOs and CEOs and professionals, and I've interviewed more than 200 leaders of all types, but mostly CMOs and marketers on the CMO Show podcast. And the women who do really well have a clear picture of who they are and what they want to do and what they want to get done,
Mm.
right? And they just do it. And it's enormously inspiring. Even as the interviewer, I'm like, oh, I want to do that. I want to be like you. Like, right? You know, there's something about the boldness and the confidence that just says, now, but the interesting thing is, even the successful people have those lingering doubts,
Absolutely.
right? They're just probably better at the bluster than the rest of us.
Absolutely.
And so I think I want to open up this conversation to hear how different people have rewritten their stories or reclaimed an old narrative, because you'd asked me before about moving from CEO or CMO to CEO or any C-suite into a
Yeah.
more senior leadership role. I know it's a cliche, but a lot of blokes just do it and figure it out. And sometimes get promoted into incompetence, let's be honest. And other women feel like they've got to like get all the right pieces together and then
Mm.
I can.
Mm.
And it's somewhere between the two, right? You need to be open about where are the gaps, as I said, and fill them. And then, but most importantly, what's the thing you want to get done? And I've always been driven by that vision. If you can paint a picture for yourself, right, and really own it, that's the start of this whole journey.
Mark, you and I reflected before we press record again today about the question you sent me via email. And the question via email was, you know, how's a white middle-aged bloke going to help an audience of senior professional females? Well, I'll pause for a sec and I'll let our audience reflect, because probably they're the ones that can answer that question. But as I listen, you know, and as I sit here reflecting back on what we've spoken about, that conversation of imposter syndrome was probably one of the first reasons I started the podcast. And it was about normalizing that, you know, there's all these successful leaders that we see a very one-dimensional picture of. And so one of the first questions I asked in probably about the first 100 episodes, by the way, we forgot to mention you're an experienced podcast host, so well done on turning it around and being interviewed rather than interviewing.
It's fascinating.
Isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it? I bet you're compelled to ask a million questions, which is what
I'm holding myself back.
I know. I can feel it. Well, I interviewed some incredible leaders, David Thodey, who led Telstra, and, he shared with me, the first sort of crisis they hit. He sat down with the chair of the board, the chairwoman at the time of the Telstra board, and said, I'm not sure I'm cut out for this. And so, I think the work you're doing is incredibly important to help people maybe shine a light on the stories we tell ourselves and how those stories can get in the way. Have you got an example of a story that you had to smash through to enable you to transition to this new phase of your career?
I do, and I haven't told this one before yet either, so tell me how it goes.
Yeah, okay.
I had the opportunity to work with a consultant who came in to, tell us what we couldn't see in our own business, right? We all do that from time to time. Bring in the consultants. Don't charge me too much. And, and so that happened. And this person said to me, you're not a real CEO, right?
Oh,
That was just like a dagger, right? It was just in that, I was like, I actually nearly cried, right?
Don't hire that person.
And I decided I didn't want to be that guy, and in the office, and I went home and I was devastated. I thought, I know what she was trying to say. Sorry, I know what this person was trying to say.
Yes.
And it was that the CEO title is most often held by corporations, people in corporations, right? But that's actually not true. The reason why that was such a hard moment was that I was already questioning myself as, have I actually risen to my own level of incompetence? Because I've seen it in media, by the way. The reason why, this is just a quick tangent, but the reason why so many media companies are in trouble is they promote journalists to editor, to managing editor, and ultimately publisher and CEO. Well, they haven't gone to business school, they haven't got an MBA, they don't know what they're doing. Like, they're journalists, right? So give them training, enable them, equip them, right? And that happens in every sector, by the way. So I thought maybe I've actually done, because I'd seen that, maybe I've actually started an agency, grown it, and I've got to a point where maybe I should just get the heck out of here and let someone else do it, because I'd much prefer to use Word than Excel, right? Just to use a quick metaphor.
Yeah.
I'd rather stand and talk and be the visionary than, well, it turns out you can still be a leader, I discovered, who has the vision, who holds the vision. And actually, the people need that. The clients need it. You need to be able to picture a future that people can't see and kind of don't really believe, but when you make it happen, they get really excited. Well, it turns out you don't need to be like incredible at, Excel, and
Whatever.
whatever, and so I had to go through that journey. It took me a while, to be honest with you. But I actually got to my own level of comfort, which is to say, I'm really good at predicting what's going to come next. And I started telling myself all of the things, the trends that I had seen that actually came true. And again, not to be too immodest, but for example, in the 2010s and early, we started seeing this rise of content marketing. I got onto that early. I was one of the first agencies to get into content marketing. We started building new clients in that space. I saw it transitioning into this broader role of brand storytelling, and I did that. I saw the rise of what's called the social impact leader, and founded through our business, the Social Impact Summit. And so now we're popularizing this idea of social impact leader, and that's a cross sector. There are people who care about the S in ESG. That's a whole nother story, by the way, but I saw that coming before it happened, and I've sort of helped make it happen. And so I can say these things out loud, without trying to blow my trumpet too much. I'm just really happy with the things that I've done, and it gives me a sense of confidence because I actually know that I have led well.
Yeah.
I have been able to bring alive ideas, and it turns out they worked, and it turns out I was right.
Yeah. So it can be that, right? It can be a comment someone makes that gets into your head on a loop. And what you've done is you've actually interrogated it for facts and found out it's not true.
Right. And then importantly, told myself, like, when I hear myself saying in those moments in an awkward meeting, or maybe actually you aren't good at this. No, I did that. Remember when you did that and you did that and you did that?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the devil and the angel in the cartoons.
And we've all got them.
If you grew up that way, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and that's the other thing, is that the rewriting of your story, it's an ongoing process. It's not like once and I'm done. I've written the novel and then hooray. It turns out there's a sequel, or you've got to keep building this story out, because that's how life goes, and it's not like you overcome one challenge and then, it turns out life's difficult, right? Who knew?
The story I hear people tell themselves the most, and there are lots, but I hear one where, fear gets in the way of people taking that next step or showing up, because they think everyone will be watching and judging. And no one's really watching. They're all preoccupied with themselves.
Yeah. Look, I say this to my kids. Turns out people don't care.
They don't.
Like, oh, my hair is terrible today, says, self-conscious 15-year-old. It's really not, though, is it? Like, no one's gonna, you look like a llama, but apart from that, like, no one's gonna care. So,
When do Stories We Tell Ourselves come out? Is that's
next year, so 2025, yeah.
That's next year, that's 2025. But people can find Bravefeminomics if they go looking right now?
Yeah, so if you go to markjones.au is my website, and you'll see the link to Bravefeminomics, or my keynote topics or anything like that. Yeah, so Brilliant. The book's still there, and the fun thing about that is that I've been able to build on it as well. So really, Stories We Tell Ourselves is looking at what I call, we don't have to go into it, but the idea of a belief journey where I don't actually believe in myself to believing in myself, was an idea that I developed for brands, right? What do people believe about your brand, and how do you take them on that journey? And I thought, hang on a minute, that actually works for us too. So sort of what I'm doing is turning it around, putting the mirror up and saying, how do we use that model for ourselves? And so I'm doing it myself, right? I sort of got the book out, and
we're always our best test case.
Yeah, that's it. So so look, it's an exciting journey, but yeah, that's where you can that's where you can find me, or Amazon, all the rest of it.
Fantastic. I really appreciate you sharing your story. I'm going to ask the last question that I ask of everybody on the podcast, which is, do you have a perspective, or from your perspective, what is brave feminine leadership, and do you think it needs to change?
Well, we always need brave feminine leaders, more of them, right? So does that need to change? Well, yeah, like we need more. So tick. The brave piece, for me, is a lot about how you turn up. And I mentioned this before, which was the continuing to turn up is the hardest piece. So I think bravery for anybody, male, female, or any gender, is when you see a barrier or an obstacle, do you believe that you can find a way through or not? And so I think that's where it starts for me. And then the other part of it is, how do I think about brave feminine leadership? This is, and I say this with great trepidation, being, again, white, middle-aged bloke, who's worked with a lot of women over the years and all the rest of it. But I think there can be a tendency to see a challenge and limit yourself. And my simple encouragement is just do it anyway. Yeah. I've always done that myself. If I see a challenge, I think, I don't know if I can just do it anyway. And you figure it out. And I think it's the drive to bring an idea alive, as I said, that will get you through. There are very real barriers that exist and remain. And some of those are locked up in old networks and old schools of thought. And I've seen that more times than I'd care to mention in terms of my work with clients and large corporations. I've seen terrible experiences and suffering by female leaders who've been removed from companies and things like that, right? So it's still very real, but at the same time, what can you control? And it's how you bring yourself together with your support team, friends, family, colleagues, on the journey. Do it anyway.
Mark, I think you've shown up, just to put maybe my perspective on the tail end of that, I think you've shown up as a brilliant example of brave feminine leadership. And that is, like, I love the explanation you've given, but it's a new version of leadership. It's open, transparent, vulnerable, and kind of owning your story and then showing up and sharing that. And, I want to thank you for both joining us, but also doing some really important work. And I can't wait to follow what that is when that comes out. It's been wonderful to have you join me today.
Thanks, Melissa. It's been great. I've really enjoyed it. Been good being on this side for a
Exactly.
change.
Have a great day.
All right.